into the Garden Terrace Alzheimer's Center of Excellence. You know, a committee had to come up with that name. And they moved him into the Morning Glory wing. All the wings were named after flowers. And Warren did pretty well. He seemed happy. You know, he ate well, put on a little weight. He was, you know, fairly happy, participated in the activities. And I saw a side of Warren that I had never seen before. It was kind of like he almost reverted back to his bachelor days. And like I said, he was a good-looking guy, you know. And so he just kind of, I guess, was a ladies' man when he was younger. There were these old women, they would sit in these chairs, 3 of them. They called them the gallery. And they would sit there all day long just staring right across from the nurse's station. And Warren, he would be shuffling down the hallway. He was about 80 at this point. And he was shuffling down the hallway. And when he'd come up to those old women, he'd kind of get a little thing going there. And they'd go, "Hi. Hello. You look nice today." And then he'd shuffle on. But as happy as Warren was there, he still kept trying to leave, and he was successful, which was amazing because it was a secured unit. They would find him. He would show up right there in the laundry room once asking when the next bus was leaving. Once they actually made it out in the parking lot, he was sitting inside a car that was very similar to the kind of car that had burned up. And they must have left the door unlocked because he was in the car trying to hotwire the car. But then there was the butter knife incident. They figure what had happened is that at dinner time, he must have taken a butter knife and put it in his pocket. And then forgot about it because a couple hours later, the aide found him. He was in his room, and you see in the rooms, the windows only opened just so far. And there were these little screws that, you know, kept them from opening too wide. Well, Warren, they figured, had rediscovered this butter knife, had unscrewed it, had it, by the time the aide found him, it was wide open, he had the screen popped out, and he was straddling the window trying to get his other leg to follow when the aide ran over and said, "Warren, Warren, stop." And he said, oh, so he pulled his leg in, and then he started to help her out, you know, ladies first. But they were able to, you know, get him back in, and they closed that window, and they confiscated the butter knife, and they called the daughter, and they said, "We need to move Warren to a more secured wing." So they moved him to Violet wing. And it wasn't that the patients in Violet their dementia was worse, it's just that they had more character, and so Warren just kind of fit in somehow. Now, it was in Violet wing that I learned about validation therapy. Instead of trying to orient him to our reality, we would just, whatever his fantasy was at that moment, was where we were. So whenever I would show up to visit Warren, and I was showing up pretty regularly because anyone that really was close to the family, I was the closest. So I would go in and I would take my mask of reality, and I'd hang it at the front door, and then I would go through those 3 secured doors, and wherever Warren was, there was I. Most of the time it seemed like we were in boot camp. Warren said, "Don't understand it, the government, they drafted me 2nd time." And I'd say, "Yeah, they drafted me too." Girls? They're drafting girls now? And then there's the time when we were on the job, never quite knew what the job was. And one day we were on a cruise, and I liked that day. That was kind of a fun day. But we would go for walks. We'd go out to errands, and we'd go out to lunch and dinner. And then I would take him golf. I would go to the driving range. Of course, he couldn't play the game, so what I would do is I would just have an iron and a wood and buy a bucket of balls. And then as I was carrying these over, Warren, he'd be shuffling along beside me, and it's just kind of recognized. You could just see that little light and light him up. And then we would reach the driving range. I'd take a tee out of my pocket, and I'd tee up a ball and hand him a club, and he'd automatically just grip that club. That tongue would come out, and he'd go along and reach back, and he'd hit the ball, and it'd arch away from him and drop and stop And then he'd smile at me. And I'd smile at him. And I'd point down to the new ball that I just teed up, and he'd, oh. He'd up, and he'd hit the ball, and it'd arch away. And he'd smile. And I'd smile. And I'd point to the new ball, and he'd go, oh. He was always surprised there was a ball there. And then came the day when Warren couldn't remember how to swing a golf club anymore. Warren was, he lived there about a year and a half at Garden Terrace. And then a daughter received a call that they had found a lump on the back of his head while cutting his hair. It was tested and it was diagnosed as melanoma. So the children all consulted with each other and decided they weren't going to fight the cancer, that they would just try to keep him comfortable. About 2 weeks before Warren passed away, Brent and I were visiting him, and Warren was lying in his bed, and he had this way of lying there with his feet crossed and his hands clasped behind him. And Brent was on one side, and then I was sitting on the other side. And for just about, a couple of minutes, the clouds in Warren's eyes parted. And he looked at me with these clear hazel eyes. And he said, I don't think I'm going to be here much longer. I think I'm checking out. And I said, well, when you do, I'll be right here with you. And he smiled. Ah, Lenny, I can always count on you. And for the very last time, the clouds in my dad's eyes came back together.